the United Nations has once again taken firm action against Iran. This time, new sanctions were officially imposed after prolonged negotiations on Iran's nuclear program reached a deadlock. The decision, announced on Sunday, September 28, 2025, immediately sparked a strong reaction from Tehran. Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the move, declaring that the sanctions lack any legitimate basis in international law. According to Tehran, the West is weaponizing the nuclear issue as a political tool to undermine national sovereignty. Iran further urged other nations not to comply with what it called a unilateral and interest-driven decision. In its official statement, the Iranian government stressed that it would not remain silent in the face of such pressure. Officials described the sanctions as a disguised form of aggression aimed at blocking technological progress and denying the Iranian people the right to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Iran reiterated that its activities are conducted within the framework of international law, including global nuclear agreements. The West, however, rejected these claims and moved ahead with tighter restrictions, including a ban on transactions related to ballistic missile programs and nuclear technologies. Meanwhile, Israel and the United States were reported to be the driving forces behind the UN's decision. Both had previously carried out strikes against several nuclear facilities inside Iran. These actions have heightened tensions and pushed the regional crisis closer to the boiling point. Tehran has described such attacks as not only a threat to sovereignty but also a clear violation of international law. Iran warned that it would respond seriously to any country that enforces the UN decision, vowing to defend its rights and national interests with firm measures. Tensions escalated further after the Ministry of Foreign Affairs declared the new sanctions illegal and discriminatory. In a broadcast to national media, a government spokesperson emphasized that the decision was part of a Western strategy to suppress Iran's independence. He argued that Western powers apply double standards. Their allies are free to develop similar nuclear technologies, while Iran is continuously targeted and punished. This rhetoric gained traction among political circles in Tehran, who viewed the sanctions as an attempt to silence scientific progress. Members of parliament also raised their voices. Some lawmakers urged the government to adopt tougher retaliatory measures, including the possibility of withdrawing from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. The mere suggestion of leaving the treaty has alarmed the international community, as it could allow Iran to expand its nuclear program without restrictions. For certain politicians in Tehran, however, such a move is considered a legitimate act of resistance against unfair external pressure. Public sentiment has also grown louder. Local media reported protests in several major cities, where demonstrators condemned the UN's decision and voiced support for the government's defiance. Citizens argued that the Iranian people have already suffered from years of harsh sanctions that crippled daily life, and the latest measures will only worsen the situation. These reactions show that the issue is no longer confined to diplomatic corridors. It has become a domestic social challenge that risks fueling instability inside the country. The United States swiftly expressed full support for the UN's decision. Washington stated that the new sanctions are the logical consequence of Iran's failure to meet international obligations. The White House described Iran's nuclear program as a direct threat to global stability, particularly in the Middle East. Officials accused Tehran of deliberately stalling negotiations while continuing to enrich uranium at higher levels. In a stern message, the United States warned that it would not hesitate to increase pressure through diplomatic or even military means if necessary. Israel also welcomed the UN decision. In a statement, the Israeli Prime Minister called the sanctions a minimal but necessary step for the international community. He stressed that Iran's nuclear threat is not only a regional issue but a global one that affects many nations' security. Reports of increased Israeli military activity, including air patrols along border areas, have reinforced the perception that the situation could escalate at any moment. Iran, on its part, doubled down on its defiance. Officials accused the United States and Israel of orchestrating the sanctions and coercing other countries into compliance. State media amplified messages from senior leaders vowing that any attempt to undermine sovereignty would be met with proportional retaliation. Tehran made it clear that it would never bow to foreign pressure and would continue its nuclear program in line with what it described as national interests. The sanctions sparked a wave of global reactions. Several U.S. allies in Europe expressed strong support, with the European Union stating that the measures were crucial to preventing nuclear proliferation. Yet, some governments voiced skepticism, arguing that excessive pressure might push Iran toward extreme measures, including withdrawal from international treaties. This divergence in opinion underscored the complexity of the Iranian nuclear issue in global politics. Meanwhile, non-aligned countries called on the UN to prioritize dialogue over punishment. They argued that diplomacy remains the most effective way to ease tensions. Many developing nations expressed concern that an open conflict would destabilize the global economy, particularly energy markets. As one of the world's leading oil producers, Iran plays a critical role, and uncertainty in the region could trigger sharp increases in global oil prices. Ironically, sanctions meant to restrain Iran may instead generate broader economic turmoil. Inside Iran, the debate grew more intense. Opposition figures criticized the government for its rigid stance, urging greater flexibility in negotiations to avoid total isolation. But officials held firm, declaring that sovereignty was non-negotiable. Reports from local media suggested that discussions about leaving the Non-Proliferation Treaty gained momentum in parliament. If this step is taken, it would not only rupture Iran's relations with the West, but also undermine the global framework designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Iran's warnings of retaliation have now become the central focus of global concern. In a recent speech, senior officials declared that the country would not hesitate to act decisively against any state supporting the UN sanctions. They drew a red line at sovereignty and national interests, warning that any breach would trigger a firm response. Observers noted that Iran has previously demonstrated its military capabilities through ballistic missile tests and regional operations, lending credibility to its threats. Analysts cautioned that if diplomacy collapses, the standoff could spiral into open conflict. Experts predicted that Iran might raise uranium enrichment levels as a symbolic act of defiance, signaling its refusal to bow to international pressure. Such a move would deepen fears worldwide, as it could bring Iran's nuclear program closer to military applications. For the United States and Israel, this would be regarded as an existential threat, potentially prompting direct military action. The uncertainty has already shaken global markets. Within hours of the UN announcement, oil prices surged amid fears of disrupted supply. Investors worried that the crisis could destabilize global trade routes and energy markets. For consumer nations, higher energy costs add pressure to already fragile economies. Thus, what began as a diplomatic dispute over nuclear rights has quickly evolved into a broader crisis with worldwide repercussions.